Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Today, we've been talking with Prathyusha all about from chaos to clarity, navigating software mishaps with effective automation. We're basically going to cover the Microsoft CrowdStrike incident that happened a few months ago. If you don't know, Prathyusha is a distinguished leader in the field of automation with over 10 years of hands-on experience and a deep specialization in mobile automation. Currently serving in the Quality Center of Excellence for Test Architecture, she plays an instrumental role in advancing testing practices at her current company. So stay tuned to hear a really important topic that I think is going to change the industry as it applies to testing. You don't want to miss it? Check it out. Hey, in today's app-driven world, businesses must ensure flawless user experience, but testing can be a challenge with limited device coverage, slow and unreliable setups, and fewer automation options. And that's where today's episode sponsor, BrowserStack, comes in. Their App Automate solution solves many of the challenges with its cloud-based app automation platform. It's simple to use and packed with features for confident app releases. With App Automate, you can integrate test suites in minutes via the BrowserStack SDK, run thousands of parallel tests across 20,000 plus real devices, easily integrate with CI/CD pipelines, test frameworks, and more, test apps in internal and stage environments, even behind firewalls, and debug instantly with video recordings, logs, and AI-powered error categorization. Their updated build dashboard also features advanced debugging like flaky test detection and quality profiles. Plus, with their real device cloud, you can test key use cases like camera injection, QR, barcode scanning, and simulate time zones, GPS, and network conditions. Boost your app quality and competitive edge with App Automate, your one-stop solution for scaling mobile app releases. Give it a try. Support the show using the link down below. Hey, welcome to the Guild.
Hey Joe, this is Prathyusha. It's really an honor to meet you. I've been following you on podcast and everything, but it's really nice to see you in person and be on the show. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So I guess before we get into it, really, why, what caught your attention with CrowdStrike? Because I know you contacted me, said, hey, I'd like to cover this. What was it about it that made you go, maybe this is something we need to dive into a little bit more?
So especially for like whatever, if you see lots of industries nowadays, like airlines or all other companies, they're outsourcing most of the testing practices to a different vendor, a different company. So it's like there are a lot of integration gaps. And if you see that a lot of emphasis is not towards the testing. So most of the times we see that the focus on the UX, UI or the development part is not the same with the testing. So these types of incidents where, entire world is in chaos, like something is broken down, you're just getting an error message, like airlines are unable to do what they're supposed to be doing. Everybody is in chaos and just not understanding what's going on. But then if you dive deep into what could have caused the problem, it kind of, for people who are already in this field for quite some time, you can kind of make a wild guess on what could have gone wrong on both parties. Like, it's not anybody's fault, to be very honest with you. And also the fact that it's very appreciative of both CrowdStrike and Microsoft, especially with the fact that they've kind of taken a quick route, the turnaround time, the way they were able to fix it, making sure they were in contact with the customer base, making sure they're providing updates. That is all like really good. But now it is, I think this incident has made a lot of experts, companies, everybody to kind of reevaluate their whole testing processes. So that is something that I always was interested in, especially throughout my career. I've seen that happening quite a bit where the funding is not that good enough for testing side of the projects usually. And most of the times we also have a notion that one person can just kind of, do the whole job. Like, why do we need a person to just see if it's working or not? It's not that simple, is what I really wanted everybody to be aware of and focus on. The importance of testing, because even in our day-to-day life, the very basic thing, you wouldn't buy something without you visually see it, touch it, or some way test it, right? So the testing is part of our daily life. So I really wanted to emphasize how important testing is for any industry, not just software, for all of the anything that you're putting out there. It is mandatory that we just have to ensure it is all like working, up and running, and all that. So this topic blends with all the things that we would otherwise talk on different occasions, but all of it comes into picture when we look at incidents like this. So that kind of caught my attention, and I really wanted to like talk about that.
Nice. So could this have been seen like how, like it just, or does it highlight like all the interdependencies we have on software, not knowing that our software relies on this other piece of software, that if that goes down, like who would have known that airlines would have been affected? So was this avoidable, or do you just see it as something we now know about? So now we need a plan based on the information we now have.
It could have been avoided because we have lots of testing that we do, right? Like if you follow the best practices like contract testing, you have shift left, you have backwards compatibility testing. So it's basically the fact that the emphasis on the integration testing, as well as how soon there should be a process of, the company should follow a certain process. Like it's not that simple where you would just update something. So the issue is basically, the contract between what the software system on Microsoft, which is the client, is expecting versus what the CrowdStrike security update was providing. So it's basically that the input parameters that were provided is not something that Microsoft was expecting. So this could have been avoided if they had contract tests in place to make sure when they do this initial deployment on their like dev or staging environments that this working fine. If there was a backward compatibility testing in place, any new updates, making sure they don't break the existing version of all their client systems. And of course, like shift left practice that is very popular these days, where all the companies are kind of moving towards shift left to be able to identify issues sooner rather than at the very end of the game, where it is like something in close to production or in production in some instances. So there are a lot of practices that are being done. It's not something new, or this is not something that just came out of an incident, but these are the things that have already been there, companies following it. It is all being done. It's just that the importance of why it should be like implemented as part of our process, how strong can we make this testing process, is what it all gets down to. So it's just that it could have been avoided, especially with when there are a lot of vendors and a lot of outsourcing that happens. It is really important to make sure we have like strong practices in place, and all of it, like none of it is actually to be done manually. Like you wouldn't even expect that something should be verified manually. You have a lot of automation improvements, you have AI, ML, everything. Like we are trending towards a different technical a lot is happening. So it could have been avoided. It's just that the emphasis on the implementing strict policies for testing, strict in place, like the release plan for anything, even if it's a minor update, especially for cyber security firms. It is really, really important that they focus more on the testing practices and procedures.
Absolutely. So before we go any further, just in case the crowd that listens to this is pretty tech savvy, but for those that don't know, what is contract testing? Because you mentioned it a few times. That's something that probably could have helped in this incident.
So to break it down, like in terms of, let's take an example of API. So you have API provider and consumer that's going to use these APIs, right? But the development of API happens on a different team, and the team that consumes these APIs is going to be different. So how do you ensure, like at the beginning of the project, you would say, okay, as per the requirements, my API is going to just give you this response. It's going to have X, Y, and Z as mandatory fields, and something else as like optional. That's the requirement use case for producer API. Now, on the consumer side, this is all communication. Like at the beginning of the project, they would agree, okay, this is what it is. And then once the consumer team starts developing their application based on what was discussed on the original implementation details, like X, Y, and Z as mandatory and something else as optional, they will develop off of their own teams. Now imagine there is no contract testing. Something has changed on the production side of the API. They've decided now to add one more mandatory field, but they forgot to, notify, or they don't have communication happening between the consumer and the API that is being developed. So then the consumer team just ends up releasing their product, and then once the API deployment happens, it's not gonna work in production, because not all the times you have staging or some environment available before you go to production. Sometimes API team does their own release schedules versus the client applications stick to their own schedules. It's just that if there is no contract testing, it would be way too late by the time they would identify that something was broken because they did not stick to the contract that was agreed upon. So these contract tests are usually run at the beginning of the developmental cycle, where both consumer and producer API would have contract tests written on their end, where they would make sure the expected responses what they're getting from consumer side, and vice versa for the API that is being developed. So these types of tests, we have a lot of the packed bi-directional flow with packed. So there are some popular contract testing tools that are being used by majority of companies. So this can also be leveraged for not just APIs but all other types of testing as well.
Nice. So yeah, it sounds like it's a great thing to use if you have a lot of third-party dependencies on your application where you don't actually need their application, but you'll know what kind of responses that they and calls they're making.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, I want to dive into a few other things, but just in case, I may have missed it. I forgot. Do you know what caused the CrowdStrike outage? What eventually it was? Was it a testing issue, I think?
Yeah, it was. So it's basically like there was an update on CrowdStrike software version. Like they had these parameters added. There is one new parameter, but then looks like that was not. They did not take into account what could have been the possible effects of this update. So they just went ahead and updated it. Microsoft, on the other hand, was not expecting that update. So this version of Microsoft was not compatible with the version that was deployed, and that's kind of causing memory out of bound exception that's eventually like crashing. So you just get an error message on the screen when you try to access the applications. So that was like, it is a testing issue. Yes.
Gotcha. So Microsoft, it's an OS. How would they have known? They must have so many third-party dependencies. I guess it goes back to what you said. You need to have a good testing procedure, a testing process in place. So let's start there. What do you think would be a good testing process to have in place? Because your title is Quality Center of Excellence for Test Architecture, which tells me already your company takes this seriously. But for some reason, I'm seeing quality centers and centers of excellence disappear. So what do you think companies need to have in place in order to have a strong testing process?
So there should be like a process for any, like for example, on Microsoft side, there is no way for them to know that CrowdStrike was going to deploy a software version and that would break it. If they had known, they wouldn't let this happen, right? So of course the issue is also with the fact that the cybersecurity, like the CrowdStrike was given access to the kernel of the Microsoft, which is where you have a lot of your important stuff. There is no way for, if something goes wrong, it's going to crash. There is a reason why we do that, because all the cybersecurity stuff would need that level of access to make sure we are handling the hacking and all that stuff. So especially for these types of things, it is more important to have strict processes in place. Like I was talking about the compatibility testing, making sure they have some types of testing, that automation tests, even that would mean very critical ones that they run every probably every day, to make sure if something changes, even if it's very minor update on the dependencies that they have, as long as they can identify it sooner, and then if they had some tests in place before the upgrade would have happened, they would have seen an issue with minor upgrades or something, like in terms of what if I have a version 1.0 but then I'm getting a version 1.2. if it was failing, they would have caught it sooner, and they would have, they would have had that collaboration with the CrowdStrike beforehand to make sure this is what we are noticing on our side. I think we just have to make sure that is kind of being taken into account on the test that you have written on your end, to make sure it doesn't happen in production. So what this here is like, the lack of coordination in terms of testing, right? Like, there are certain tests that CrowdStrike runs. It's not that they are just, doing the migration. They do have tests that they're running. It's just that they did not take into account like what could have been the effect of, if a system or one of their clients has a version that is 2 levels below the version that they are putting out there. Will it still work, or would it cause any problems? So that is like making sure your backwards compatibility is also in place. So it's like, it's not one place where this process needs to change. It's basically that everybody, like the consumer, CrowdStrike, Microsoft, everyone needs to have these processes in place. Because most of the times you would think that, even for our regular company release cycles, for any feature or anything that goes out the door, we have multiple levels of multiple rounds of testing that's done before it gets to production, like probably months of time, because you have, your sprint level testing, you have regression, you have integration, user testing, all that, and then you do production smoke test before you make it live. And also the fact that especially for these types of huge upgrades, we could also have, rolling out like specific set of users. Instead of rolling out to the whole user base, they could do a, selected rollout. Like for example, in like for companies that deal with, doctors and patients, like my company for instance, we have different regions. It's not going to be in like the same country. We have to be HIPAA compliant. We have FDA regulations that are different for each country. So what happens here is that instead of rolling out the feature for the whole doctor or the customer user base, we do selected rollout, like 100 people. How is it going? Is it fine? Do we encounter any issues? Because at that point, instead of affecting millions of users, you would just have 100 users that are affected by worst case if something goes wrong. So that type of strategy is something that you would you need to have in place. Also, the first hand testing that happens immediately after your software is updated, right? Just to make sure you have rollback plan in place. Like something goes wrong, you immediately can find out something's off. You immediately roll back to the previous version to make sure if it happens off hours, like nobody's gonna at least the intensity of the issue or the affected user base would be very less. So these types of processes, it's not something new. It's just that it's all already there. We just have to have, that being documented, or the gatekeepers. Like for example, if we talked about center of excellence, the reason why center of excellence is formed is to make sure we are, following all the best practices that are good in terms of software testing, making sure we follow everything before products get out the door, making sure it's bug free. What else can we do? How can we improve with whatever latest trends that are coming up in the industry? Making sure how do we incorporate them into our release cycles, all of that, because it's equally important for our features to work. Even if it's a cool feature, if it doesn't work once it gets to the production, there is no point. So yeah.
I love that answer, because now you're talking about shift right and like feature flagging, canary testing. That probably definitely would have only, like you said, roll it out to a few users or 100 or a segment, and then be able to roll it back would have probably solved this quickly. So that's a great technique.
Yep.
How hard is it to get started with that then? Is that must be like a big commitment, right? Or are people afraid to do that in production? Is that why you see maybe there may have been a gap there?
Yeah, possible. Or maybe they never even thought about, they wouldn't have guessed that something would have, well, I mean, Microsoft has been in the industry for like so long. Did we ever see this happen? We did not. So no one would anticipate that. It's just that, now that it has happened, everybody is talking about it. But what if if it didn't happen? We wouldn't talk about it. We would just go off our business the same usual way. So that is the only thing that I think could have been the issue, because It's just that they have certain checks that they do, like the basic checks that they would do on each end, but then the possibility of something like this could go wrong, they probably did not encounter or take into account. So now that this happened, they like everybody would start to think about even the statement that's issued by Microsoft after the summit that happened on understanding what this issue is about, what could have how could have this been avoided and all of that. If you see, most of the things that we've talked about are already being taken into account. It's just that I feel like it's just that no one anticipated this would happen. It would be like, as long as stuff is working, all of our critical path to production is all good, we are fine. But these types of things, especially comes into picture when we are dealing with third party applications who we don't usually talk to on day-to-day basis.
Right. So how do you then balance that? Because you could test for everything. I know a lot of people are risk based, but how do you balance the need to test versus the need to get in the hands of the customer and do it cost effectively?
So yeah, like I said, like you could use automation. You could leverage automation for cost cutting. Instead of having manual people, like if you end up needing like 4 or 5 people on both the sides, that could be reduced to quite a bit by relying on automation, CI/CD, where you have regular runs. You don't even have to talk to the or have a touch base or something with those teams, as long as you both the parties have their critical test running up and running on their CI. Every now and then they get the results faster, making sure the integration points are all touched, not just sticking to one system. Like for example, if you have a 2 or 3 teams that are working together on an application, like a UI team, backend team, API team, all of them will have their own tests that are really good, that they do what they're supposed to be doing. If there is no integration testing happening between these, like every UI test is only sticking to UI checks, API to API, and then database to database. Now imagine if they don't do any other testing on making sure backwards compatible or something like integration, the end-to-end flow is all good, nothing is going to go wrong. We definitely don't see that product working in production unless they have someone who's making sure all the teams are connected and all of the testing happens and everything is working fine. I think that is what is required here as well. In order to do it cost effectively, we have, with AI and ML, there is a lot that is coming up, self-healing automation. We could see and leverage which parts of it can be used for security, because not everything can be used for security, because it has a lot of other complications. It's not as simple as API and UI testing, but definitely worth exploring. And innovation should happen there, where we could leverage some concepts of it to make sure the issues are identified automatically instead of manually someone finding it or something. I mean, as long as you know the problem somehow automatically coming to you, fixing that and making sure everything works fine is doable.
Nice. So have you had time to mess around with any AI technology, and how has it helped you?
I did it out of my personal interest, but nothing that I was able to do it within the current organization, because we are HIPAA compliant and FDA regulated company. So it's not, even for like when I was on the mobile team, we were looking at, trying to explore all the cloud-based solutions for running our tests on simulators, emulators, especially because we have photo capturing, which is AI. AR related machine learning. We heavily rely on machine learning for our image processing, because that requires testing to be very efficient with the actual phones and actual camera. Though we have automation that would actually do this, in order to be able to test this out across multiple devices, we tried exploring a lot of cloud-based solutions, and we were like, the approval was not in place because of the security policies and HIPAA compliance. So I was not really able to apply them in my job, but I out of my interest, I did look at a lot of stuff. There is one conference that happens every year in North Carolina. SQA conference. So there you have a lot of vendors coming in, like the browser stack, all of the apply tools, everybody comes in. So there we have a lot of sessions for AI ML as well. So how like what they could do. So yeah, I mean, whatever the research I've been doing, all the papers that I've published, it's all out of my personal interest.
Nice. So, a lot of times I think companies see testing as a cost center, not a value add. Do you think this will help? I think I saw CrowdStrike was being sued for billions of dollars. Do you think this helps testing in the long run, or do you think this would be like any other incident, it'd be forgotten in another month or so?
No, I don't think this is going to be forgotten that easily, especially the fact that, there is an emotion piece involved in this incident, right? I mean, if it was just computers shutting down, I mean, who cares? The people are gonna forget, but it's not. It's not that. It's basically, there were traveling people that were affected. Imagine the emotion that goes on there, and there could have been some people who are probably planning to get married. Maybe they were going to meet their loved ones, their families. They're something that's really important in terms of their life events. Would they ever forget what happened? They missed it because of the airlines being unable to get the stuff on time. They all missed what they wanted to do. So it's an emotional attachment at this point, right? So it's not that easily forgotten. And also for the companies, it's it's the fact that I mean, though the customer base that was affected is very less for the Microsoft user base, but it still got nationwide attention. Like everybody were like, what is going on, what is going on? So it's not that small of an issue where they would just release one press release and they're fine about it. No, I don't think Microsoft is taking it lightly either. Like if you see the things that they are planning on doing, the analysis reports, I really appreciate the way both the companies addressed this one, because it was never blaming whose fault was it, who should own it. It was never the case. It was more of like collaboration, trying to fix the problem for their customers, which shows they really give importance to incidents like this. So I think this is going to set a new tone for a lot of companies, where the cost center, like you've mentioned, most of the times you don't usually get a lot of funding for quality side of the resourcing or staffing or anything, right? So things would change for a lot of companies. Like no one would want to be in such spot. I think this probably is gonna set a new I think new stage for quality. We will probably have more importance in the future.
Awesome. Okay, Prathyusha, before we go, is there one piece of actual advice you can give to someone to help them with their automation testing efforts? And what's the best way to find or contact you?
Oh, for me. Actually, I also am a mentor on ADP List, which is a free platform for all of the tech professionals. So if anyone's interested in, finding out more about automation, needing help with like getting started on automation, leveling up, I am a mentor on ADP List. You can always reach out and book a session. It's free. You don't have to pay anything. I have a lot of mentees that I'm mentoring currently, who are like, some of them just graduated looking for automation roles. Some of them are like, at the beginning of their automation journey, wanting to understand more on how they can get involved and get into senior management roles and things like that. So yeah, that's one way you can reach out to me. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Or I need a follow-up question on that then.
Mm-hmm.
For your coaching calls then, is there a common theme you hear all the time that people are struggling with automation?
Yeah. So most of the times, the things that I hear from them is, the initial struggle of setting it up. So they have a lot of environments, they have a lot of test data, a lot of dependencies on other teams, right? That the struggle that they initially face to just have that whole flow, like a full stack. We always talk about full stack development, but we never really talk about full stack role in a software development testing industry. There is this thing that's full stack. I mean, it's not a known technical or an official term, but if you talk about my so for when I started my career, I was the very first SQA engineer for that the company had for mobile team. They did not have any testing presence in the company for mobile applications. So it was on me to make sure how do I ensure the product's software testing, right? So I was the one who did the POCs to pick up a tool language that would work, finishing the setting up of the frameworks, making sure it's scalable, working across all the environments, and then CI/CD setup, and then making sure I do the DevOps part. So I kind of did the full stack role in my field, where I'm doing everything from starting A to B until everything is done and up and running, right? But we don't really talk about these types of things. But that is something that is being asked from the people. So that is the struggle that I see from most of my mentees, where they're like, my job is to just write code, but I'm expected to know, CI/CD, scripting, Python, too many languages. Developer can just stick to one specific technology and language, but for me, they ask like Python, Selenium, JavaScript, all other languages. Like, am I really on a right track? Like, do I want to pursue my career in this? Like, what do I do? And most of the times, lack of recognition is the biggest thing that I see from my mentees, that they feel very, demotivated. They don't feel like they're bringing value to the company, because any meeting that they go to, they always see that the developers are getting credited, for product owners are being appreciated because the product is, delivered, UX, UI, everything is good. But then for all of that to happen, testers were part of the project, but they never really get that credit. So these are like the common things that I hear from all of my mentees.
Thanks again for your automation awesomeness. The links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/A518. And if the show has helped you in any way, why not rate it and review it in iTunes? Reviews really help in the rankings of the show, and I read each and every one of them. So that's it for this episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating end-to-end, full-stack automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers. Hey, thank you for tuning in. It's incredible to connect with close to 400,000 followers across all our platforms and over 40,000 email subscribers who are at the forefront of automation, testing, and DevOps. If you haven't yet, join our vibrant community at testguild.com, where you become part of our elite circle driving innovation in software testing and automation. And if you're a tool provider or have a service looking to empower our guild with solutions that elevate skills and tackle real-world challenges, we're excited to collaborate. Visit testguild.info to explore how we can create transformative experiences together. Let's push the boundaries of what we can achieve.
The Test Guild Automation Testing Podcast. With lutes and lyres, the bards began their song. A tune of knowledge, a melody of code. Through the air it spread like wildfire through the land, guiding testers, showing the secrets to behold.